You're listening to Voices in the Library, a podcast by Austin Community College Library Services in Austin, Texas.
I'm Alexander Speedson.
And I'm Dave Wilson.
Dave and I are faculty librarians at ACC. Together we talk with a diverse group of authors, artists, and thinkers from both the Austin community and the world at large. To hear their stories, discuss the role of research in their life and work, and find out how they are using information to create new projects.
Today we're joined by librarian and author Red Wassenich. Red was a librarian at ACC for over 30 years, where he was instrumental in developing ACC's information literacy programming. But Red is probably best known as the creator of the Keep Austin Weird movement and the author of two popular books, Keep Austin Weird, A Guide to the Odd Side of Town, and the follow-up, Keeping Austin Weird. Red, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So Red, you started as a librarian in 1984. And one of our questions is, how did you see research change during your time as a librarian?
Well, the most obvious thing is the internet didn't exist when I started.
That makes for lots of changes.
Yeah, it was a funny thing to happen mid-career, the internet. So it was largely paper-based. It was much more hand-holding, using things like Reader's Guide in paper form, which most people never even heard of now. Because you'd have to look up an article and then figure out if the library subscribed to the issue. I mean, it was torturous. When I first started, it was interesting. We had one online computer terminal at the reference desk, behind the reference desk, that only the librarians could use because it was too weird for the students. But it was actually really good. I think it was called Research Helper, something like that. Uh-huh. But it was actually quite good, surprisingly. And then, of course, we got into CD-ROMs, having the periodical information delivered on those. So we had this tower of like 20 CDs that we'd have to reload every month. And the switch over from print-based to online was, of course, the monumental change in my career.
Uh-huh.
And in some ways, in terms of information literacy, it was kind of ironic because one of the things I really tried to push in information literacy was getting away from just teaching how to use tools to analyzing information and evaluating it, because that's ultimately the point of why we do all this stuff. We've really been able to, I think, switch over more to teaching them analytical skills rather than just procedural stuff. And God knows it's more and more important. You just hear that all the time. People just believe everything they see online and so on. People think they have analytical skills, but as we all know, they're pretty scarce, really. So we have to be more proactive in trying to go out and integrate into the academic curriculum, I think.
So, Red, you coined the phrase, Keep Austin Weird. How did that come about?
It fell out of my mouth, and I was making a donation to a local all-volunteer nonprofit radio station called Co-op. And during the Lounge Show, which was my favorite show and which is happily still on, and this was way back in 2000, and so I was called in to make a donation, and the person said, well, why are you donating to this show? And I said, it helps keep Austin weird. And a little click in my head. And so I mentioned it to my wife, said, I like this phrase. And she said, well, let's get bumper stickers. So she did. And I got the website, and it very, very slowly took off.
So how did it come about, this idea of turning that into a book, your original book, Keep Austin Weird?
A publisher called me up and said, you want to write a book?
Oh, someone contacted you?
Yeah, there was actually a bit of serendipity. There was an article about, this must have been like 2005. So it was starting to, get traction in town. And the editor from this publisher had seen an article that was in the Southwest Airlines travel magazine
Isn't it weird
about it?
How these
and
things
so
get
she
out
read
there?
it and said, well, that could be a book. And so she called me up. I said, okay. And the rest is sadly history.
The rest is history. So once you knew that you were going to work on this book, what was your process? How did you go about identifying and finding the kinds of weird things that you wanted to include in the book?
I actually got up off my ass and went around town and looked at stuff and took pictures.
You hit the pavements and
Yeah, and it was the same with the second book, with the second edition of it. It's like, God, I don't know, is Austin still weird? And maybe I've called my own bluff by saying I'd do another edition. But once I got out and would go out and participate, there's still stuff.
There were plenty of new weird things in the second book.
Well,
And
sadly, a lot of the old ones
things,
are gone.
They're gone.
Yeah.
And when you were doing your research, did you use any zany, unconventional research methods or, outside the box ways of research?
Not particularly. I hadn't thought about that. Talking to people. I mean, once you get the reputation, people come to you, kind of.
That's interesting. So, because you were the
Right.
Keep Austin Weird guy, and you're working on this book, and you've had
Yeah,
the
have
first
you heard
one
about that
published,
new All
do you get
Potato Band
emails
or
and
whatever? Yeah.
stuff like that?
Yeah.
Phone calls and emails with people
Right.
saying, "I've got something. Next time you do,
Right.
you got to put my friend's weird."
And I've been
House and-
very lazy about updating the website. In that I haven't updated the website, but I used to, would say kind of, here's current weird stuff, So I was on top of it more. But I'm old now, and
So instead of the stuff we originally were talking about, traditional research methods and the indexes and the computer databases and whatever, this came down to like pounding the pavements, taking pictures, talking to people. It
well,
sounds like.
when you look at something like, I don't know, the Austin Chronicle or even the Statesman, my eye would kind of go for the oddball stuff. Once you start looking for something, you start seeing it, that sort of thing. And I miss plenty, I'm sure. I do now, especially now that I'm not exactly a spring chicken and I don't hang around the latest clubs and that sort of thing. So.
Out of all the research you did, what's your favorite story from both books?
Oy. Well, when I was working on the second edition, there is a actually now closed graffiti park over on just off Lamar called
I was going to
Hope
mention
Gallery.
this. Yeah.
Fantastic place. It opened about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. And so I was there taking pictures for the new edition, and this woman walked up, young woman, wearing a Keep Austin Weird t-shirt. And so I went up to her and said, "You're probably not going to believe this, but I'm the guy who came up with the Keep Austin Weird."
What would you think if you're standing there and someone
Great pickup
stranger?
line.
Yeah, exactly. That's the weirdest.
And she was
Austin.
she was a young, very attractive woman.
Yeah.
But strangely, she believed me. And it turned out that she was there with her boyfriend, and they both had on Keep Austin Weird t-shirts. And they had just flown in from Paris. They were French, and had bought the t-shirts at our airport. And that was the first place they went. They went straight from the airport to the graffiti park. And,
You're bringing
there
people
I was
to our
taking
city.
a picture.
They heard the slogan.
So that was, I loved that story.
So because it sounds like you got a chance to talk to a lot of people in making this, and I at least I have the sense as I'm looking through the book and looking at the photos and your captions and remarks and stuff like that, that it seems like there are a lot of anecdotes and good conversations that came out of putting this together. It seems like a book full of stories, and it feels like Red Wassenich is kind of by my side, as a guide leading me through town. I like that.
I had to make a point of not sitting there and just complaining about, back Austin used to be more, the whole slogan, Keep Austin Weird, has a certain nostalgic negativity to it almost. It's like, used to be better, which, of course, I think is true.
We have talked a little bit about your work, with students doing academic research. And we've talked a little bit about the somewhat more unconventional approach of like talking to people and hitting the pavements and getting their stories and putting this book together. Are there any common threads between these different kinds of research that you see? I mean, is there anything that stays the same in both realms?
Well, actually, whenever students came in the library like to do a formal research paper on something local, it was always like, "Oh, this is going to be harder."
I have had that
because
feeling.
so many of the sources are national.
They want to get really specific and really local.
Yeah, it's like, how many poodle trimming parlors are there in Austin?
So if you get that question, is that one where you would refer them to talk to people at all, or?
Yeah, if you find one poodle trimmer, they probably on a network.
To the network. The matrix of poodle. Yeah.
Yeah, and so once I knew one weirdo, they'd say, hey, Scott over here has a backyard full of mannequins.
Well, actually, that's connecting them to experts on the topic that they're looking for in the same way you look for experts on the weird.
And of course, doing a book, you actually want to go there and take a picture and stuff. So it's a little more hands-on.
And what about in 2019, with this current information landscape, what advice do you have for ACC students?
Be skeptical. That whole information evaluation thing, I can't stress the importance of that enough these days. It's just mind-boggling, the variety and the lack of quality control that people have to deal with now.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Red. We loved hearing your stories about Keep Austin Weird and your experience as a librarian and researcher. And best of luck to you. And I hope you do another edition of the book at some point. Yeah. Why are we getting a thumbs down on that? Are you done with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of being active, I love the fame and fortune, but
I'm sorry we can't provide any fortune for you.
No
for
one has
today.
But I'd really like to pass it along to someone to kind of here, do that website. It could be all sorts of interesting things.
Keep finding
and I'm
weird
not
stuff.
interested in doing that. So, so if you know any promising young weirdos,
Red is on the search for promising young weirdos.
Yeah.
Thank you, Red.
Thank you, Red.
you're welcome.
You've been listening to Voices in the Library. Voices in the Library is produced by Austin Community College Library Services in Austin, Texas. Until next time, this is Dave Wilson.
And I'm Alexander Speetson. Thank you for listening.